So Elio here is joining us today. He's a product leader with over 15 years of experience in cloud computing, IoT, and AI. He currently serves as the head of product at AWS, working on the next generation developer experience organization, where he's responsible for building new ways to power software developers to use AI. Uh, Elio began his tech journey at Microsoft, has spent a significant amount of time there working in cloud and in AI. He also has a portfolio of 11 patents, which he has gathered along the way. And all of this is backed by his PhD in computer science, which taught him and allowed him to go very deep on technology and concepts such as cloud and AI, so on and so forth. Outside of work, Elio is a big gamer who is interested in strategy games and adventures, and also a budding musician is what I hear from him. So I'll hand it off to him and allow him to walk us through any additions to his introduction, as well as a presentation on designing AI-powered products. And we'll follow that up with the Q&A. So keep the questions coming in the chat.
Thank you so much, Rishi, for the introduction. That's great. The talk today is about like 5 gotchas when designing AI-powered products, mostly taken from like my experience. So this will mostly be about developer-facing products, but most of these gotchas can be applied to other kind of products as well. I had here like an introduction slide, but Rishi did an amazing job. I'm not going to go through this again. So the thing that I want to start talking about is that AI product design is still nascent. And this is really what we're going to talk today is not about using AI for product management. I'm not going to talk about churn analysis or product suggestions. People like you also bought something like that. I'm talking about products where the AI is actually the thing that people are buying and the thing that people are interacting with in the product. Now, everybody is familiar with ChatGPT, but that's definitely not the only kind of things. It's like when you're really enlisting a product for its AI component. And with that said, let's just get started. My first gotcha is not replace your user. And I will have a running example here that is Amazon DevOps Guru. This is a product that you guys can use. It is a product that is aimed at the developers and operators and basically helps you operate a cloud application. Fundamentally, you don't have to be an expert in those things, but keeping a complex application running, it's hard. There's lots of people that work on it 24/7 to make sure that is available, that it runs fast, and there's no problem on it. And Amazon DevOps Guru is a product that uses AI to help with that. Now, one thing that could be problematic is if this product would say, okay, I'm going to do the job of the DevOps engineer or the operator. So I'm going to identify that there's an issue when there's an issue and detect the solution and give you the solution. That sounds amazing. It's like, okay, that is a product that does everything that I need. There's a few issues with it. The first one that I identify there is lack of visibility. In the end, the operator has to know what the application is doing. His job is on the line. He has to understand what is happening, what is not happening. If something is done by the AI, what are the parts that he's responsible for? If I am an operator, I do not want to be in a situation where some part of the application is not being monitored. And what do I tell my boss? The AI didn't do it? It's like, okay, but I'm paying you, not the AI. So lack of visibility is super important. And the other one is unmet expectations. If we say, hey, the AI is going to do your job for you, there's basically 2 ways that it can go. The very optimistic user would assume that the AI actually solves all of his problems. So when the AI fails or something happens that is outside of the scope, there's going to be, at best, disappointment, at worst, actual issues in production, which of course he doesn't want. Or you may have a more pessimistic user, which would assume that the product doesn't work for you and they won't buy your product to begin with. So the important thing, even when designing products with AI, is really going back to the basics and understand the specifics of how AI can help. Let's say that AI is another team member. It's like, okay, AI will be responsible for these kind of applications, these kind of problems, those kind of solutions. That has to shed visibility on what is the scope and give expectations of what the user is supposed to expect. So it's really easy with AI to get into very big and wide, ambitious goals, solve every operational issue. But in the end, all the product practices still apply. Your job's to be done, understand the problem, clarify the scenario. Specifically for like DevOps Guru, we find, among many things, let me pick something that is pretty high level, that it was really good at understanding operations for databases. So we could say, okay, if you are a database operator, these are all the things that we do for you. We monitor your, we help you with capacity planning. We'll let you know when you're running out of it. If there are issues with specific queries, we'll tell you which queries are, and we could basically do that to provide visibility and to set expectations correct. Gotcha number 2. Don't forget a feedback loop. Now, on the right here, there's the hook model that is for unrelated to AI. That is for every kind of product. You can basically come back to some kind of feedback loop or product loop. There's usually some form of trigger, a user action, a reward from this action, an investment from the user, and then coming back to a trigger. This also applies not only to your Facebook notifications or like buttons, which is probably what people think about when you think of that. But this is also applies to things such like much more prosaic and like B2B kind of products such as DevOps Guru. You have a problem and operational insights. You expect the customer to do something with it. You have some form of reward, like, hey, AI discovered something for me, gave me a solution. Then you have a chance to ask for an investment of like, okay, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? And then triggers like better insights. So this takes me to what's on the left of these slides. How are you measuring effectiveness? That is super important. How are you measuring how is the product being received and behaving with your users? There is explicit and implicit user feedback. They have both places, and explicit feedback would be kind of a thumbs up or no, I didn't like it, a frowny face, like things like that. You can get a lot out of explicit feedback, but it's very partial. You definitely want to have some kind of implicit feedback as well. Depending on what you're designing, try to find a way to design this feedback, either explicit or implicit, in the product to begin with. It's really hard to bolt things on after the fact. And you're losing valuable information when you ship the product, which is the moment where you need it the most. You need to do continuous monitoring. With AI, things are a lot less deterministic. Your model may drift. Your users may start be doing different things. You may have different cohorts that start asking for different things. In case of DevOps Guru, we start having customers that have different kind of applications. Our quality may go down. It's really important because AI is a lot less deterministic. Now, that is true even if you're not using AI. With AI is just more important. And how are you improving? That's something that AI really supercharge if you're able to do it well. And it really it becomes so much more important making sure that you use that feedback to automatically or organically improve the experience that you're providing to customers. Gotcha number 3, it's all about context. It's really hard to design a product that basically guesses what the user wants. And with AI, sometimes there's this understanding or misunderstanding that AI is able to predict things, which is true. AI can predict things, but the more context you can provide, the better it is at predicting. That's why like Google is great and can predict what you're about to search. And the context is fundamental. And one of the problems that we're seeing with AI is trying to use this capability when it's not required. In the end, a prediction is a prediction. It may be wrong. You can be right many, many times. But everybody has been in the situation where your autocomplete fails. And it's like, I wanted to write something and you get something different. That's a really bad experience. And in general, coming back to the providing visibility to customers, you want to make sure that if the user already knows what he or she wants from the product, you have an easy way to provide it to the user. For instance, in DevOps Guru, one of the things that used to happen before we implemented a feature was that we would look at your applications and we'd start saying, hey, there are issues in this specific part of the application. This is going slow. And many customers would come back and say, yes, but I don't care that that part is slow. It's fine if it's slow. That's something that runs on the weekend and I don't care. I don't want to wake up anybody on Saturday night for that reason. That is an easy question for a user to answer. That is not asking them to do work, and is not asking them to do a lot of data processing or like a lot of design to come up with that information. One of the things that we found out pretty quickly is if you can ask the user things that they already know, you can provide a much better experience from your AI-driven product. Many people would have similar examples from like playing with like ChatGPT or LLMs, where basically providing a good prompt that has all the information just gives so much better results. Most of prompt engineering is basically saying, okay, make sure that you exactly state what you need. Now, how do we make that organically happen in our product and not give prompt engineering guidelines to use your product? We want to be better than that. That said, since context is so important and the context is derived from the user, you do not want to have the user repeat the same thing all the time. What is your data flywheel? Wouldn't it be nice that, coming back to the ChatGPT example, I do not want to have to prefix my a prompt with the same preamble every time that I'm using ChatGPT for a certain scenario. I want that to happen automatically. Now, if that preamble depends on the user, how do we make sure that we gather the context organically in the application so that we get the best of both worlds? We get the user full context without the effort of like repeating it each time, and of course without the problem of having to guess it. Gotcha number 4, the UX. The UX for AI is not as defined as the UX that we have for all the other software. It's still nascent. Again, this is like we're all kind of trailblazers right now. And I also want to preamble this section with like, this is not complete. I only talk about things that I have time in a short talk, and for which I have like stories to back up, and that I think made sense. Like in these things, there's a lot of guidelines for human AI and interactions. I have one from Microsoft Research here. There's one from Google as well, just a short like Google search or Microsoft Copilot search or whatever is your search of preference will provide you many references there. The first thing that I want to say is that there's not only chatbots. Since ChatGPT, like everybody starts like things first as like, oh, okay, we're going to put like a chatbot that helps you do something. That is great, but there's a lot of things that you can do by using AI and even generative AIs and LLMs that do not necessarily require a chatbot kind of interface. So think about that. The other thing that is really, really important is explainability. Establishing trust with the AI. Remember, the AI is like another member of your team. So when there's a user that is using AI, it needs to understand why things are happening. One of the big misunderstandings that we have is that I hear a lot, specifically for software developers. There's sometimes this idea that AI will substitute developers because now it can code. Well, it turns out that developers do not really spend most of their time coding. They spend most of their time on understanding what code to write. So, and most importantly, let's assume that the AI could actually create code that is perfect right away. In general, I would give it a task, it would do everything, and then I have like a nice pull request with all of my code ready to go. The problem is that me as a developer now, I have, instead of having a feature development problem, I have a reverse engineering problem. I do not know what the AI did, why it did it in a certain way, and all of a sudden I'm on the hook to make sure that it works, and that is exactly what I needed. So, and in general, developers prefer to do software development than reverse engineering. So that's really a situation to be solved. All of the things that you're thinking that the AI should do, they should be explainable. It's really hard to establish, except for very, very simple tasks that are basically so simple that without the explanation, the user can grok it right away why it's done in a certain way and that it's correct. Everything else should basically assume that that a user requires some form of information on why things were done in a certain way. Why did I develop a feature in this way? Why is this an error? Why is this, in the case of like DevOps Guru, why is this a solution to the problem that my application is experiencing right now? In general, the control is really important, and you want to put the user in control most of the time. There may be some situations where the application is very creative, is very used in a pull fashion from the user, and is used in a creative fashion. Think about using your image creation or your DALL-E, and it's like, look, I want to just have some options. And in that case, you don't really need probably like a lot of control. You can basically just, it's being used as kind of like throwing dice. But for anything that is part of a workflow, that is part of what your user is supposed to accomplish, the user wants to be on control. You want to make sure that the AI and the user can have an understanding of what the plan is before you provide, you do a lot of work and you provide a lot of understanding from the user to do. For instance, if I'm developing software, before you spit 10,000 lines of code at me, tell me at a high level what you're about to do. Oh, I'm building a web application. It's going to do A, B, C, and D. Is this really what you want? That kind of flow is really important to have. The other thing that you should take in control and in and you should pay attention to, is the precision thresholds and things that change between a push interface and a pull interface. If you're pushing a notification, providing an insight, and kind of pushing information to the user, your precision threshold has to be very high. More than 80%, you have to be right. You have to be sure to be right. Otherwise, users are not going to use the product, are going to turn it off. Think about your annoying notifications. If it's wrong most of the time, you're going to shut it off. That is very different. And if you have a pull interface where the user is coming to you and say, hey, picture that in a situation that we had, for instance, for cloud operations, and hey, there's an issue in production. If I come and ping you and I'm sure that there's an issue and here's the solution, you're delighted. It's like, oh, okay, look at this. You did a job for me. That's great. But if it's not wrong, I woke you up. If it's not true and it's wrong, I woke you up at night and you're upset. It's like, why did you wake me up? You were not sure. And on the other hand, there's a pull situation where the user says, okay, I know that there's an issue. Maybe this AI can help me figure it out. It's kind of like semi-free operation. If I get something that is useful, I'm happy. If I don't, like, okay, it didn't work. I was about to go and do my job anyway. So it kind of feels like something that is, even if it's rarer, that is useful. It's a much better interaction. So really consider which interaction to use. Now, there's a whole word for this human AI interaction, from responsible AIs and trust issues and a whole bunch of things that I'm not getting into in here at all. So follow like other guidelines for that. There's one here, but there's others as well. The fifth gotcha is to start small. It's really easy with the promise of AI to start saying, okay, I'm gonna solve, coming back to our running example of like DevOps Guru, operations for all the applications. And I'm gonna solve all the problems for all applications and everything is gonna be amazing. Again, remember, is still product design. All of the things that you learn about product design still apply. You want to have an MVP. You have to identify which problem you're solving, the job to be done, specifically what you want to do, and you want to, and your metrics. AI is in general a lot more, even more data-driven than normal product management. So if you're starting to apply AI to an existing product that doesn't have a good data foundation in terms of like metrics and understanding, I would start from that. Before adding AI feature, build your data foundations. Start to measure and make sure you have a feedback loop. That's like probably one of the most important things. Try to understand how your product is behaving. That's very important without AI. With AI, it's fundamental. You will not be able to know what you're delivering. And you're basically just going to be in the dark without a feedback loop and without your data straightened up from like day one. I have a few bonuses from the gotchas. Do not ignore the trends. This stuff is like super new, and we really don't know a lot of how things are done. A lot of things are becoming multi-agent. Do not consider, do not try to build a single model to rule them all. So embrace having multiple AIs, if you will, in your product. So it's really okay starting small and add things to it. Try to decompose the problem. I've seen many ways of like doing that. If I'm in software development, there's this paper called Meta GPT, along other ones, where basically it uses multiple agents that use LLMs to basically act as different roles in a product design team. There's like a product manager, there's an architect, there's a developer, there's a tester, and they kind of interact together, and they generate better software together than GPT-4 by itself. And so try to work in, okay, let me solve a specific problem, create a model that does that really well. And if you want to increase the scope, add other things, that's okay. You do not have to create a single model to rule them all. It's actually harder and potentially more problematic. Another thing that is interesting is a trend towards edge and local model. There are local LLMs. You can run LLMs on pretty powerful ones on a laptop, and definitely in like in like private data centers. There's a lot of things that are gonna become feasible in terms of lower costs and lower latency. Being able to run an LLM locally means that I may be able to actually speak without 2 seconds delay between Alexa do something and actually the answer. That would really increase communication bandwidth, create a much more natural conversation, and I can imagine a lot of other applications that would benefit from lower latency. Other things, of course, data sovereignty and privacy. You don't have to send your data to other data centers across the net. Those are like, there are going to be a lot of things that are going to be enabled by this tech being more distributed. IP protection is also interesting from like that perspective. If you're shipping your own models, make sure that you take care of your IP if you're not if you're afraid of your models being stolen. But that goes both ways. That means that you can also run your model on your premises in case that has to be close to the data. The last thing is really considering that, especially for Gen AI, the productionization of generative AI is still in its infancy. These hybrid systems that are basically build their functionality with some Gen AI, some normal software, are fundamentally still unknown. There's few companies that deliver them. Everybody has, I would say there's very few of those products in production that are more than a year old. And that's the thing. Think about programming before software engineering. We have some ideas on how to do things, but continuous integration, continuous development, how tests look like, how do we maintain things going forward, what happens if you lose your IP and talent for a model that you have in production. There's a lot of things that can happen there. With that, I believe I am a little bit over the half mark of this webinar. So I think I have my question slide now.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. We'll jump right into questions. The first question is from Dav in the chat. What are some other interfaces beside chat? I think you covered that, you should think about like various interfaces. I think the question coming in from chat is from the chat is really like, what are the various other interfaces that can be used here?
Absolutely. That is a great question. There's a lot of things that are enabled by especially like generative AI. First, there's like, okay, things could be a traditional interface and Gen AI could power what you're asking them to do. For instance, if we have something that is like, fix my mistake, there doesn't have to be an interface that is different than just like a button or a right-click menu or like things like that. But let's go in the generative AI ones. Multimodal is really interesting. You could upload pictures or look at pictures or look at what's on the screen to try to infer what is required, or at least as part of your input. There's, of course, audio, which is very, very interesting. And there are other forms of text that are not necessarily a chatbot. One thing that you can see in the I think it was in the OpenAI dev days, where basically Sam Altman presented this way to create GPTs. And one of the things that you had is that you had um, some kind of you were defining what you wanted, how you wanted your GPT to be, and that had a chat interface. But then it would create a document that had many, many different parts of it, and you could directly go and change that document. So a document is still natural language, but it's not chat. And if you think about it, when we build something, let's say that Rishi and I want to, build something new, we would create some kind of specification document or requirement document. We do not just chat. I mean, we would in the end collaborate on a document, right? So that could be another form of interface where, I am collaborating on this document so that we have this approach. How to do that? There is some background art on how to interact on a document. Think about auto completion, squiggly lines, suggestions, right-click menus. There's a lot of things that can happen. GitHub Copilot does similar thing for code, where there's very, very complex auto completions. But there's other ways that you can explore.
Thank you. I think the second question here that we have is that there's a lot of talk about like LLM response degeneration over time or degradation. How do you solve the challenges associated with like detection and avoiding such degradation of AI responses? How can any UI that you build be responsive towards these changes and adapt dynamically?
Yeah, no, that is great. So that is exactly the point that I wanted to make in my gotcha number 2 or 3. It was the one with the feedback loop. You really need to maintain that feedback and monitor continuously what is the quality of the experience that you're providing. And that allows you to detect model drift. That is not a generative AI specific thing. Usually normal AI models, like traditional non-generative AI models, have that problem as well. But really focus on like your continuous monitoring and really seeing that is reflective of your development of the model. And that is why kind of goes back to the point that I was making of like, look, we have a little bit of discipline on how to productize AI. This discipline is called ML Ops. And that basically says, okay, together with your model is like your compiled code. But then you need everything else for a system in production. You need CI/CD, you need the deployment pipelines, you need tests, integration tests, and making sure that you can maintain that going forward. A similar level of things are required for AI models. So you cannot say, oh, I have this model, now I'm done, I'm going to put it in production. I know that that's what all of the AI products from like Azure and AWS that basically say, hey, with one click, it's in production. It's like, technically it's true, but the thing is that then you have a lot of things that you still have to do. If you have the model and it's working very well, that's basically the same of like your developer saying, hey, I compiled this code and it's running. It's like, okay, but then I still need a repeatable deployment pipeline. I need to make sure that I have unit tests. I need to make sure that every time that I deploy, I retest everything so that I have no regressions. All of the same practices need to happen for AI models. There are some, in this respect, I do not think that generative AI is different than normal AI. So you can find books on ML ops that will tell you everything about this.
I think the next question is related as well. It's related to how do you like avoid incorporating human bias into AI? So this goes back to like I think there's a classical paradigm here as well, which is how do you do this for machine learning models and then how do you do it for AI?
Absolutely. I mean, that is, it's very, very similar. Honestly, I'm not an expert on like responsible AI. That's usually how it's called. In You can find guidelines from all the major AI players, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon. In general, you can use generative AI without building your own models. That kind of dispense you from like worrying about that perspective. But in general, there may be biases also not in non-AI products. So there's no difference in practicing inclusivity for any other part of your product design. Specifically for models, I believe there's a lot of specifically statistical models, like you were saying, Rishi, on like similar things for ML. But most of it, as a PM with my PM hat on, really try to understand what is the impact that you're trying to avoid and what is the results that you're trying to achieve with these kind of practices. That's really like really trying to understand what the problem may be is takes you like halfway to like being there, and then you can go in more specific technical solutions on how to avoid those kind of biases. But where I see the worst issues coming from like this lack of attention to biases is when the impacts are really large and they were not assessed or identified beforehand.
Thank you. The next question is around differences in P2P and B2C AI product design. So, like, have you seen any patterns and differences in how these two worlds operate?
Absolutely. There is one fundamental difference between B2B and B2C is that with B2B, your user may not be your customer. And that makes a big difference because there are many other differences, and my experience is mostly B2B. But for the purpose of this conversation, you may have to develop different pitches and different, to a certain extent, even different features for the user, which is the person that will actually use the product, and the person who will actually buy the product. And for things that are AI-based, that is really important because sometimes it's hard to assess the impact of these products because they start to become close enough to the output of a human, and measuring productivity of humans is also very hard. So you're basically saying, okay, let's say that I have an AI tool that helps my developers build software faster. How do I measure that? And to a certain extent, the developer that's using the product is not measuring its productivity, has a feeling of like, am I being happier or developing happier? I feel faster. That's not going to be enough for the person that has to pay a lot of money to for those products. Similar thing for like operations and like increasing availability and like things like that. Is this going to be relevant or not? So a splitting between who's buying the product and who's using the product is really one of the main differences. And I remember that was one of the reasons in one of the very, very old things digital conferences. You may find it on YouTube. There was this conversation where Steve Jobs was asked, why are you not making a phone? That was 2005. And he basically said, because I have to go through to sell a phone. I cannot really sell to the end person. I have to sell them to the phone companies, and they're not my users. In the end, he was able like to cut a deal and find a way to be able to sell iPhones directly to people. But at the time, phones were basically came with your contract, and he had to sell to AT&T and T-Mobile and Verizon, and he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to deal with the split between your user and your customer. But in B2B, that's mostly how it works.
The next question is around like timelines for moving AI further along in the tech adoption cycle. I think this question talks about like many people are still wary about using AI. It's not necessarily trusted widely at this point in time. So by like based on your experience, when do you think this will be a part of more products, more in terms of like product life cycle management,
I see.
on and so forth, right? Like when does it become mainstream? I think like that's sort of what the question is
If
getting.
I have to be honest, I think that we're not really stopped by lack of demand. We're actually blocked by inability to deliver fast enough. And I'm not saying inability because there's not extremely talented people. There are. It's just that there are some things that just take time. Everybody is moving super fast on this, like probably everybody knows and sees. Um, and that includes really, really smart people. Um, if you're asking for a prediction on like, oh, when do you think that certain things will happen? Um, I I am expecting that a lot of I don't know, consumer-facing products will include some form of AI in terms of like generative AI or like really AI first kind of feature in, I would say, a year. Um, B2B may take longer, mostly because there are more requirements to satisfy, and also there are more steps in the value chain. So in order for you to see something in your something product, that basically means there has to be a product for that company, and there has to be a product for the product that supplies that company, and then you will see things kind of move down the value chain. A similar effect may happen for consumer products, except for things that are for large companies that are much closer to like the origin of the tech. So honestly, I would basically just think about who are the major accounts of, pick your AI leader, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta, whatever, who's around there. There are consumer companies there, and they're gonna have it like in a year, they're gonna have something out that uses it. Is really follow the value chain. Who's selling to whom, fundamentally.
Makes sense. The next question is around like AI explainability and like incorporating this into the product life cycle. Like at what stage do you think it's like reasonable to include it at in the product life cycle? Like when you think about like discovery, building, selling, like at what point would you consider like AI explainability, and when should like a average product manager do that?
Yeah, I think that whenever you're doing a feature that uses AI, you should consider explainability. If that is something that is if that is something that requires an explanation, if that is something that is helping the user accomplish a goal and cannot be easily checked. So for instance, a product search or product suggestion, that is something that it may require some explainability, but fundamentally, if I'm looking for a table lamp and I see 10 table lamps, I can quickly see if that's what I need or not. The problem is if I'm asking to do something for me and I say, hey, set a give me like which restaurant do you suggest for romantic get together in Seattle tonight? And then it comes up X restaurant. I say, well, why? Is it closed? Is it because it was the only one that had a spot? Is it because it has a lot of reviews that says that it's romantic? Is it because it's on a lake? What are we talking about here? So that's as soon as you understand, and the more things are like, okay, you're helping somebody accomplish a task or a job, the more I want to know why that is the case. Fundamentally, as I was saying, you want to feel in control. And honestly, like especially if it's your job that you're trying to automate, you want to say, okay, well, I'm doing the job and you're helping me. It's not that you're doing the job and I have to take it what it is, or I have to try to understand it after the fact. You want to try not to have your user wonder why something is there, because honestly, otherwise there can be like a lot of cynicism, or like, okay, why do you suggest this? Is it because you're trying to sell me something? You have some ulterior motives. Really important to bake into it right away, and also in the UX, the explainability should really like be baked into the UX, because you don't want it to be sometimes like, if you think about it after the fact, you do not have a clear way to put it in a prominent place enough, and then you might as well not have it.
Awesome. Those were all the questions that we had. Thank you for answering each one of those with in great detail and with great patience. It was a pleasure having you today at this chat, and we hope that the audience learned something about designing products in AI.
Thank you very much, Rishi. It was a pleasure being here. Emma as well, for your coordination, and everybody that participated to the webinar.
Yes, thank you, Elio, for the amazing presentation. And as always, Rishi, for being our host. And thank you for those who tuned in today. As always, I will be sending out the recording on Friday so that you can share with colleagues. We hope to see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.